I had always thought my life was normal, maybe even predictable, in a way. I'm 50 now, have been married to Mark for 25 years, and our daughter Emily is in her second year of college. It was a comfortable life, nothing extraordinary, but we were content. My mother, Jean, had been living on her own since my father passed away 5 years ago, and she came to visit every few weeks. Nothing special, just the usual, a cup of coffee, some small talk, maybe dinner. It was routine, and I never thought that something as simple as that would turn everything upside down. It was a Tuesday evening, one of those nights when the house felt peaceful. Mark was sitting on the couch, watching the game. I was in the kitchen with my mother, setting the table for dinner. We were talking about the latest family gossip, nothing too exciting, just the kind of chatter we always had. I could hear Mark's voice, occasionally, yelling at the TV, but mostly it was quiet. My mother had been acting a little different that evening, though. There was a nervous energy in her, like she was waiting for something, but she didn't say a word. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the calm before the storm. That everything changed when Mark stood up from the couch and walked into the kitchen, where my mother and I were finishing up the meal. He had a look in his eyes, gold serious, and I could tell something was off. I thought it was just the stress of his work, or maybe something trivial that had annoyed him, but I quickly realized I was wrong. "Grace, can I talk to you for a second?" he said, his tone sharp. It wasn't the way he normally spoke to me. He usually had a softer approach, especially when my mother was around. I followed him out of the kitchen, confused, and we stood in the living room, away from my mother, but I could still hear the sound of plates clinking as she set the table. "What's going on, Mark?" I asked, trying to read his expression. "I don't want her here anymore," he said flatly, his eyes narrowing. My brain didn't process the words at first. "What are you talking about?" "I'm serious," he continued. "I don't want your mother in this house anymore. She's a burden. She's causing too much drama." My stomach dropped. "What? She's my mother, Mark. She's never caused any problems before. What's going on?" His face reddened, and his voice grew more strained. "I'm tired of it, Grace. She's always criticizing everything I do, making everything uncomfortable. I've had enough." I stared at him, trying to make sense of this sudden outburst. Mark and my mother had always had their differences, sure, but this was different. There was something deeper behind his words, something personal. He had never acted like this before. He had always been polite to her, even if they didn't always get along. "So, why now?" "Mark, you're being unreasonable. You can't just kick her out like this," I said, my voice trembling. "She's my family." "I don't care," he snapped. "I want her gone." I felt a rush of anger flood my chest. "You're really going to do this?" He crossed his arms, his jaw clenched. "Yes, I'm done with it." It felt like everything around me had come to a halt. My mind was racing, but no words came out. I turned back toward the kitchen, where my mother was still humming to herself, unaware of the tension building. I felt a sickening knot in my stomach. How could he be so cruel? This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a complete dismissal of my mother, the woman who had raised me, who had always been there for me. I stepped back into the kitchen, trying to calm my shaking hands, but before I could say a word, Mark followed me, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. "Jean," he said, his voice cold and commanding, "you need to leave, now." My mother stopped what she was doing, looking up at him in shock. "What did you say?" "You heard me," Mark snapped. "I'm done with this. You need to leave." I froze. The shock in my mother's face was something I'll never forget. She stood there, her lips trembling as she tried to process what was happening. "Mark, what's going on? What did I do?" "You've done enough," Mark said, his voice low and threatening. "Get out of my house." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. My mother, my flesh and blood, was being kicked out of our home. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to speak, unable to move. My heart was racing, and my thoughts were scrambled. What was going on? What had changed? "I'm sorry, Jean," I whispered, barely able to look at her without another word. My mother gathered her things and left. The door slammed shut behind her, and I stood there, alone with Mark. The house felt empty, hollow, as though the life had been drained from it. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I finally managed to say. "How could you do that?" He just looked at me, his face unreadable. "She needed to go, Grace. You don't understand, but you will. You'll see." But I didn't understand, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I needed to understand. There was something more to this than Mark was telling me, and I was determined to find out what it was. This wasn't just about my mother. It was something deeper, something that had been festering for years. The next few hours were a blur. I kept replaying what had just happened, over and over again, as if doing so would somehow make sense of it. The house felt too quiet without my mother's presence, and I was still trying to catch my breath from the shock of it all. Mark, on the other hand, was acting as if nothing had happened. He sat back on the couch, flipping through channels with the same indifference he always had. I couldn't understand it. The man I had spent over 2 decades with had just kicked my mother out without so much as a second thought, and yet he sat there like it was just another evening. I couldn't take it any longer. I had to know why. I needed to confront him, to make him explain himself, to get anything out of him that would give me an answer. "Mark," I said, my voice shaking, "why did you do that?" He didn't look up from the TV. "I told you already. She had to go." "No," I snapped, my patience running thin. "You didn't. You haven't told me why. You've just acted like this is normal, like it's some sort of punishment for her. But it's not normal, Mark. What is going on?" He finally turned to me, his eyes hard. "I don't want to talk about it." That was it. The stone wall. I could see it in his eyes, the way he had closed himself off. It wasn't just anger. It was something else. It was like there was a door I wasn't supposed to open, and he was locking it tight. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. "This isn't just about my mother, is it? This is about something else. You've been acting strange for weeks. You've been distant, and now this. I want the truth, Mark. What's really going on?" For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me, and I could feel the tension building between us. It was as if he was weighing whether or not to tell me something he knew I wouldn't want to hear. Finally, he spoke, but his words were clipped, as if he was just trying to get them out quickly. "You don't understand, Grace," he said, his voice lower than usual. "You never have." "Understand what?" I asked, confusion flooding my thoughts. "What are you talking about?" He shook his head, as if the conversation was something he had already had in his mind, something he was done with. "I don't have to explain myself. You won't get it. I did what I had to do." I felt my heart race. There was something underneath his words, a deeper anger, but he wouldn't let it out, and it made me feel more isolated than ever. "You've changed," I said quietly. "I don't know who you are anymore." He didn't respond to that. Instead, he stood up abruptly and left the room, heading for the garage. I watched him go, a cold knot forming in my chest. It was like he had closed the door between us, leaving me with nothing but questions and a gnawing sense of betrayal. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the look on my mother's face as she left, the way she had stood there, helpless, before walking out the door. I thought about Mark's coldness, his refusal to explain anything, and the strange, almost calculated way he'd dismissed my mother. Something was going on, and I had to know what it was. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't rely on Mark to give me answers, so I had to dig deeper. I started with the basics, checking his personal files, his emails, anything that might give me a clue. It wasn't much at first. He had always been a private person, especially about finances and his personal dealings. But as I was going through some old papers, I found something. A letter. It was tucked away in the back of his filing cabinet, hidden behind a stack of tax documents. It was addressed to him, but the return address was unfamiliar. My heart skipped a beat as I pulled it out, noticing the formal, almost businesslike tone of the envelope. I tore it open, my hands trembling. The letter inside was from a law firm. The date on it was recent, just a few weeks ago. The contents were brief, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. It was a notification about a confidential family matter, regarding a will that I had never seen before. My mind raced. A will. My thoughts flickered back to my father's death, and the will that had been read a year ago. I remembered that my father had left most of his estate to charity, a decision that had caused some tension between Mark and me at the time. But my father's will didn't mention anything about Mark or his family. It was straightforward, simple. But this letter, it hinted at something far more complicated. I couldn't let it go. I had to know who this law firm was, what this will meant, and why Mark had been hiding it from me. I spent the next several hours trying to track down the law firm. It wasn't easy, but I finally got a hold of someone who was willing to talk. The lawyer on the other end of the phone wasn't forthcoming, but after a few pointed questions, I learned that the will in question wasn't my father's, it was Mark's mother's. Her estate had been left to him, but there was a clause in the will that I hadn't known about, one that required Mark to fulfill certain conditions before receiving anything, and apparently, The clause had something to do with my mother specifically, her relationship with Mark. The lawyer was vague, but I could tell this wasn't something that could be ignored. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. Mark's refusal to tell me anything, his hostility toward my mother, all of it was starting to make sense. There was a secret, and it involved more than just my mother. It involved Mark's inheritance, and the conditions he had to meet in order to claim it. I needed to confront him, but I knew now that this wasn't just about my mother anymore. This was about a much bigger betrayal, and I wasn't going to let it go until I knew the whole truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting closer to the truth, but it was maddening to be kept in the dark. The letter I'd found from the law firm only deepened the mystery. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Mark had been hiding things from me for years, things I'd never known, things I'd never thought to question. The very foundation of our marriage, our life together, felt suddenly unstable. I wasn't sure if it was my growing suspicion, or the growing sense that Mark was hiding something bigger than I could comprehend, but I was determined now. I had to know what was going on, and I had to confront him. I couldn't wait any longer. The next morning, Mark was already up before me, as he always was, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking his coffee in silence. I didn't waste time with small talk. I couldn't afford to. I had to get answers, and I had to get them now. Mark, I said, my voice low but firm, as I walked into the room, holding the letter in my hand. We need to talk. He didn't look up from his coffee. About what? About this. I placed the letter on the table in front of him, my heart pounding as I watched him. I found this yesterday. What is it? Why is there a will from your mother's estate that I didn't know about? He froze, his hand halting midair as he reached for his coffee cup. I could see his face turn pale, just for a split second, before he masked it with his usual cold composure. Where did you find that? He asked, his voice tight. I found it in your filing cabinet. Mark, the letter says there's a clause in her will about your inheritance. I want to know what it says. I want to know why it's hidden from me. Mark exhaled sharply, then pushed the letter away, shoving it toward the center of the table like it was some sort of threat. It's nothing, Grace. Don't make it into something it's not. It's not nothing, I replied, sitting down across from him. You've been hiding things from me, and I have a right to know. You can't just expect me to ignore this. He sighed heavily, clearly frustrated with the turn of the conversation. But I could see a flicker of something else in his eyes, fear, maybe, or guilt. I leaned in, determined not to back down. Mark, I said, softer this time, you need to tell me the truth. Why was my mother involved in your inheritance? Why did you kick her out last night? I need to understand. He looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to tell me, or to keep everything buried. For the first time in years, I saw the cracks in his mask. The man I thought I knew so well, my partner. My husband was a stranger to me in that moment. Finally, he spoke, but his voice was barely a whisper. You wouldn't understand, Grace. I didn't want to get you involved. I never meant for you to know any of this. Then tell me, I urged, my frustration building. Tell me what it is that you don't want me to know. He set his coffee cup down with a clink and stood up abruptly. For a moment, I thought he was going to walk away, but he turned to face me, his shoulders tense. It's not just about my inheritance, he said, his voice low and controlled, but I could hear the undertones of something darker in his words. There's a condition in her will, a stipulation that I had to meet in order to receive anything, and it has to do with you. I blinked, stunned. With me? Yes, Mark said, his eyes narrowing. It's because of you, Grace. Your relationship with my mother, the way you've always treated her, the way you rejected her, the way you've never accepted her, that's what it comes down to. I sat back in my chair, trying to process his words. This didn't make sense. I had always treated his mother with respect, despite the tension between us. But what was he saying? That my relationship with his mother had somehow been a barrier to his inheritance. I've never rejected her, I said slowly, my voice shaking with disbelief. I've always done my best to be civil. But what are you talking about? Why would that affect your inheritance? Because, Mark continued, pacing in front of me, my mother's will said that if I couldn't reconcile with her, if I couldn't prove that I was willing to make her my priority, her, not you, then I would forfeit my share. She wanted me to choose her over you, and I didn't want to. I stared at him, my mind racing. The pieces were starting to come together, but it was like I couldn't quite make sense of the whole picture. His mother had set up a test for him, one that involved choosing her over me, and he had failed that test. But why? Why hadn't he told me this sooner? And last night, I said, my voice cracking, you kicked my mother out because of this. Yes, he admitted, his face a mask of guilt and frustration. I had to, Grace. She was a reminder of everything I failed at. I knew what I had to do, and I couldn't keep up the act anymore. My mother wanted me to make a choice, and I did. I couldn't believe it. The depth of his betrayal, his mother's manipulation, his willingness to throw me under the bus for the sake of his inheritance was staggering. And yet, I could see the guilt in his eyes, the way he wrestled with his own conscience. This wasn't just about money. It was about something deeper, something he had hidden from me for years. I felt my chest tighten as the weight of everything we had been through together. Our marriage, our family began to sink in. Mark wasn't the man I thought he was. And now, I had to decide what to do about it. I stood up, my legs weak, but my resolve stronger than ever. You've made your choice, Mark. Now I have to make mine. I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the house. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this go. Whatever secrets Mark was still hiding, whatever lies had been buried for years, I was going to find them. The days following my confrontation with Mark were a blur of emotions, anger, confusion, betrayal. I had hoped that once the truth was out in the open, something would change, that Mark would finally realize how deep his actions had cut, and that we could somehow start repairing the damage. But instead, I found myself more isolated than ever. Mark apologized, of course. He spent the next few days trying to make up for the hurt he had caused. He brought me flowers, promised he would make things right, and insisted that he had only acted out of fear. Fear of losing his inheritance, fear of his mother's disapproval. But his words, though kind, didn't reach me anymore. The damage was done. I couldn't forget how icily he had humiliated my mother, how casually he had betrayed me in the name of family loyalty. But there was something else, a gnawing suspicion that wouldn't leave me. The letter, the will, Mark's mother's ultimatum, it didn't add up. I felt like I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, and if I was going to get any closure, I needed to find it. I decided to take matters into my own hands once more. I had to learn everything about Mark's family, especially his mother, and figure out what her will really entailed. That meant getting access to his mother's private affairs, something that felt like crossing a line. But I was done playing by anyone else's rules, so I called my old friend Carol, a private investigator who had helped me with a few personal matters in the past. She was discreet, smart, and had the kind of no-nonsense approach I needed. I asked her to dig into Mark's family, his mother, specifically. "What do you want to know?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "I need to know everything about her will," I said, my voice tight. "I want to understand the full terms. What kind of condition did she put on Mark? What's he hiding?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure you want to open this can of worms, Grace? You've already confronted him. You're not going to get much further if you keep pushing him like this." "I don't care anymore," I said, my tone more resolute than I felt. "I need the truth. I've been lied to for too long. Please, Carol, just do it." She sighed, but I could tell she was agreeing. "All right, I'll see what I can dig up." As I waited for Carol to get back to me, I tried to focus on the things I could control. Our daughter, Emily, for one. She'd been distant recently, but I hadn't wanted to burden her with my troubles. Now, though, I knew I had to talk to her. The family dynamic was changing, and I needed her support more than ever. I called her that afternoon, and when she picked up, I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Hey ma'am, everything okay?" "Not exactly," I replied, forcing a smile. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Can we meet?" She hesitated, then agreed. "Of course, I'll come by after class." When she arrived, I could tell she was concerned. I hadn't told her the full extent of what was happening with Mark and his family, and I didn't want to burden her. But at this point, I knew I couldn't keep it from her any longer. "Sit down, honey," I said, motioning to the couch. "There's something I need to tell you." I explained everything: the will, the condition about Mark's relationship with his mother, how he had kicked my mother out of the house, and how I was now questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. Emily listened quietly, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "I had no idea, Mum," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "I never liked the way he treated you sometimes, but I didn't think it was this bad." "I didn't either," I replied, my voice breaking. "I thought we had a good marriage, but now it feels like everything is falling apart. Emily looked at me for a long moment, then took a deep breath. You deserve better than this, Mom. You know that, right? I nodded, grateful for her support, but there was something else in my mind, something nagging at me. What if I was making a mistake? What if I was too focused on Mark's betrayal and not seeing the bigger picture? Later that day, Carol called me back. She had some information. I got a hold of the documents, Grace, and it's worse than you think. Your husband's mother didn't just leave him a portion of the estate, she left him everything, under one condition. I felt my heart race as I listened to Carol's words. What condition? Mark was supposed to prove that he could sever ties with you, Carol explained. It's not just about loyalty to his mother. She wanted him to choose her over you. And it looks like he's been hiding this from you for a long time. My blood ran cold. Mark hadn't just kicked my mother out to protect his inheritance, he had done it because his mother demanded it. She had forced him to choose between his wife and her, and he had made his choice. It wasn't about family, loyalty, it was about something deeper, a twisted, controlling need for power and dominance. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. For the first time in years, I felt like I truly understood what was happening. The betrayal wasn't just about money, it was about control. Mark had been living in fear of his mother, trying to appease her at the cost of everything he once claimed to care about. And now I was stuck in the middle. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to let this go. Whatever it took, I was going to confront him once and for all. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me or my family anymore. The truth hit me like a freight train, and for a moment, I thought I might lose myself entirely in it. Mark's mother had set up the perfect trap, a condition so cruel, so manipulative, that it was almost impossible to fathom. But it all made sense now. Mark's actions, his coldness toward me, his refusal to acknowledge my mother, they were all tied to a sickening power play for control. His mother wanted him to choose her over me, and it was clear now that he had done exactly that. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this, something darker, more sinister that I was only starting to uncover. The more I learned, the more I realized how much I had overlooked. Mark hadn't just betrayed my mother. He had betrayed me in ways that went far beyond a single argument or disagreement. He had been lying to me, manipulating me, all for the sake of appeasing his mother's insatiable need for power and control. And the worst part was, I had let it happen. I had ignored the signs, excused his behavior, believed in the good man I thought he was. The more I thought about it, the more I started to doubt myself. Was I the one overreacting? Was I really the one at fault here, for pushing him to this point? I had always known that Mark and his mother had a complicated relationship, but I had never imagined it would go this far. Now, I was left questioning everything. It didn't help that Mark seemed to be in full damage control mode. He was acting like nothing had changed, as if the bombshell I'd uncovered didn't shake him to his core. But that was Mark, wasn't it? Always hiding behind a facade of calm, pretending nothing bothered him, even when everything was falling apart. I had tried to confront him again. The day after I spoke to Carol, I had to know if there was any chance we could fix this, any chance we could rebuild what we had lost. But when I confronted him, he just looked at me like I was the one who was crazy. He tried to convince me that I was misinterpreting everything, that I was the one who had made this about something it wasn't. You're blowing this way out of proportion, Grace, he said, as I stood in front of him, holding the letter from the law firm in my hands. This isn't about you, and it certainly isn't about my mother. It's just business, Grace. You don't understand what it's like to have family pressuring you like this. I wanted to scream, but I held it in. I understand perfectly. Mark, you chose her over me. You kicked my mother out of our home for her. How is that not about me? It's not like that, he snapped, his voice rising now. I had no choice. You don't get it. If I hadn't done what she wanted, she would have cut me out of everything. I'd be nothing. Nothing, I repeated, my voice incredulous. You're nothing to me right now. You've already chosen her, and I'm the one left holding the pieces of this shattered mess. His face twisted in frustration, but there was something in his eyes now, something darker. You always think you're the victim, Grace. You always make everything about you. You think I'm the villain, but you're just as bad. You don't get it. You never will. I could feel the weight of his words hitting me. They were meant to hurt, to make me doubt myself, and it was working. It felt like I was drowning in his manipulation, unable to escape the emotional trap he had set for me. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, he turned it around. twisting my words until I was questioning my own sanity. I felt completely alone. The worst part was that the more he gaslighted me, the more I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I was overreacting. After all, he seemed so sure of himself, so calm, so in control. Maybe I was just too emotional, too dramatic. Maybe I was the one who was ruining everything. But then, every time I thought I might give in, every time I questioned my instincts, I'd remember the look on my mother's face as she left our house that night. The way she'd tried to keep her dignity, even as Mark humiliated her. That image, that heartbreak, gave me the strength to keep going. I knew I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't the crazy one here. He was. I stopped looking for validation from him. I stopped hoping that he would ever apologize in a way that made sense to me. He wasn't going to. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I leaned on Carol for support, keeping her in the loop about everything I was learning. I also made a decision that scared me more than anything else. I was going to take steps to protect myself. That night, after yet another uncomfortable dinner, where Mark pretended nothing was wrong, I went into our home office and started looking through our financial records. I knew I needed to get a clearer picture of our situation: Mark's finances, his mother's estate, everything. I couldn't let him manipulate me any longer. I needed to know the full extent of what I was dealing with. It didn't take long to find something that made my blood run cold: a list of assets, investments, and properties that Mark had been hiding from me. Some of them were tied to his mother's estate, but others were things he had been building up on his own, assets that didn't belong to him alone, things I hadn't known about, things that didn't add up. It was then that I realized how deep this went. It wasn't just his mother who had manipulated him, it was his entire life. Mark had been living a lie, and I had been living in it with him, completely unaware. I knew what I had to do. This was no longer about salvaging our marriage. This was about saving myself. I had spent too many years hiding in the shadows of Mark's lies, clinging to the notion that if I'd just tried harder, everything would go back to how it used to be. But I knew, deep down, that what I had been living wasn't a marriage, it was a carefully constructed illusion. Mark had been playing a game for years, and I had been his unwitting pawn, but not anymore. As I sat in the office that night, poring over the financial records I had unearthed, everything seemed to fall into place. The assets he had hidden, the trust funds tied to his mother's estate, and the secret investments, all of it pointed to one undeniable truth. Mark had been keeping things from me for a long time. This wasn't just about loyalty or family. This was about control, and I had been allowing him to control me. But that was going to change. I knew that the next step was crucial. I couldn't afford to back down now, not when I had everything I needed to expose the truth. I had to confront him one last time, only this time I wouldn't be the one on the defensive. I would take charge of the conversation, and I would make him see the consequences of his actions. The next day, Mark came home early, as he usually did. He walked into the living room and gave me a curt nod, as if everything was normal between us. But there was no mistaking the tension in the air. It was like an electric charge that hung between us, both of us knowing that the inevitable confrontation was approaching. I didn't wait for him to speak first. I had rehearsed everything I needed to say. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, standing in front of him with my arms crossed. "And this time, you're not going to talk me out of it." He raised an eyebrow, a look of annoyance flashing across his face. "What now, Grace? We've been over this." "No," I said firmly, "we haven't. Not by a long shot. I've been patient. I've let you manipulate me, gaslight me, and lie to me. I've let you tell me that I'm the one who's wrong, but I'm done with that now." His expression hardened. "I'm not going to listen to this. Grace, you're twisting everything. You know that, right?" "No, Mark," I said, taking a deep breath. "What I know is that you've been hiding things from me for years, and now I'm finally ready to expose them. You can't control me anymore." I pulled the file folder from the table and opened it in front of him, pushing the documents toward him. "Here's what I found: everything. The assets, the trust funds, the investments, and here's the real kicker. I know about your mother's will and the conditions that were tied to it. You want to know why she had you pick her over me? Because she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew you would choose her. You were never meant to choose me, and you proved her right." For a moment, Mark didn't speak. His face was ashen, his eyes darting from the papers to me and back again. I could see the anger building in him, but I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything I had uncovered. You think you've won, don't you? He said quietly, his voice laced with venom. You think you can just turn this all around and make me the villain? I don't need to make you the villain, Mark. You've already done that yourself. The truth is enough. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought he was going to lash out, but he didn't. Instead, he let out a sharp laugh, his voice mocking. You really think this is about some villain trope, don't you? It's not. This is about survival, Grace. About me having to keep everything together. About me having to choose between you and her. You don't understand that. You never did. I took a step toward him, my voice steady but filled with resolve. You're right. I never understood. But you know what? I understand now. That this was never about survival. This was about control. You've been controlled by your mother for so long. You couldn't see that you were doing the same thing to me. Mark's face twisted, his jaw clenching. You don't get it, Grace. I was protecting us. I was protecting this family. I shook my head. No, Mark. You were protecting yourself, and in the process, you destroyed everything that mattered to me. You hurt my mother. You hurt me. You hurt our family. There was a long pause. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. I could feel the weight of everything we had been through crashing down on me, but I held my ground. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me anymore. Not ever again. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice much softer now, though there was still a hard edge to it. What do you want from me, Grace? What do you expect me to say? I took a deep breath, finally feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. I want you to own your choices. I want you to admit that you've lied, that you've hurt me, and that you've been hiding things from me for years. I don't need your apologies. I need you to face the truth. Mark didn't respond right away, and for a moment I thought he might not. But then, he looked down at the papers on the table, his eyes scanning the documents, and I saw something in his expression, something I hadn't seen in years. Regret. It wasn't enough. It wasn't close to enough, but it was a start. I've already made my choice, Grace, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know, I replied, my heart heavy with the weight of it. And so have I. I turned away from him, walking toward the door. I knew what I had to do next. I couldn't stay in this house with him. Not now. Not after everything that had come to light. The door clicked shut behind me, and I walked out into the cool night air, my mind racing. The hardest part wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life. I never imagined that it would come to this, a courtroom battle, fighting for my rights, for my dignity. I had thought that once I confronted Mark with the truth, everything would fall into place, that he would see the error of his ways, and we could work through it. But the more I pushed him, the more I realized that he was not the man I thought he was. The man I had spent 25 years with was someone who would do anything to protect his secrets, his inheritance, his pride. And if that meant destroying everything we had built, then so be it. The hardest part wasn't just the betrayal, it was the aftermath. It was the look on Mark's face when I told him I was leaving. I hadn't expected him to fight me on it, not the way he did. But he did, and he fought dirty. Mark hired one of the best divorce attorneys in town, a man who was known for his cutthroat tactics. He tried to paint me as unstable, a woman who was emotionally driven, irrational. He dug into our past, tried to bring up every flaw in our relationship, every disagreement we'd ever had. He twisted everything into something it wasn't. His goal wasn't just to win the divorce. It was to make me look like the villain. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I had Carol, the private investigator, working behind the scenes, gathering evidence proof of Mark's hidden asset, his manipulative behavior, his secret dealings with his mother's estate. I had legal counsel, too, a woman named Linda, who had seen her fair share of high-profile cases. Together, we built a case against Mark that was airtight. He couldn't run from it. The truth was there, and it was damning. The day of the trial arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with a mixture of emotions. I had never been in a courtroom before, never imagined that I would be the one sitting in the witness chair. But there I was, facing the man I had once loved, the man who had shattered everything I thought I knew about him. Mark sat on the other side of the room, his face hard as stone. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He was the one in control, or at least, that's what he thought. The judge called the court to order, and everything became a blur of testimony and cross-examination. Linda, my lawyer, stood firm beside me, her voice unwavering as she presented the evidence. Then it was Mark's turn. His attorney tried to paint me as the one who had pushed him into a corner, the one who had driven him to make the choices he had. They twisted every word I'd ever said, every decision I'd ever made, and I could feel it, the weight of their lies, the sting of their manipulation, but I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when I had everything to lose. The turning point came when Carol presented the documents I had discovered, the hidden assets, the investments that Mark had kept secret. Linda called the bank's legal representative to testify, and the truth came out. Mark had been lying, hiding money from me for years, all while claiming that he didn't have enough to share fairly in the divorce. He had hidden his wealth, his investments, and everything else he thought I couldn't uncover. And then Carol dropped the final bombshell. The will, Mark's mother's will, which he had manipulated to gain control over me and our family. The clause that tied Mark's inheritance to his relationship with MIT was all laid bare. There was no more hiding. Mark had been playing a game, and the stakes were my life, my future, my family. The courtroom fell silent. Mark's face went pale as the documents were read aloud. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and for the first time in months, I saw something resembling fear in his eyes. He tried to argue, tried to deny the evidence, but it was too late. The truth was out. There was nowhere left for him to run. The judge looked over the evidence and the testimonies, then turned to Mark, his expression stern. "Mr. Carlson," the judge said, his voice cold, "your actions have shown a complete disregard for your wife's rights, her dignity, and her well-being. Your manipulative behavior and deceitful actions in this matter are unacceptable." The words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He didn't respond. He didn't have anything left to say. The ruling came quickly after that. The judge awarded me a fair portion of the marital assets, including the investments Mark had tried to hide, and declared the prenuptial agreement invalid based on his deceit. But more than that, the judge ordered Mark to pay for the legal fees and costs related to the case, a decision that sent a clear message that his actions would have consequences. When the gavel came down, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It was over. It wasn't the end I had hoped for, but it was justice. And for the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my own life again. As we left the courtroom, Mark didn't look at me. He didn't even acknowledge my presence. It was as if he couldn't bear to face me, and maybe he couldn't. After all, he had spent so long living in a world of lies. It must have been hard to face the reality of his own actions. I walked out of the courthouse with my head held high. The past was behind me now. The future was wide open, and I wasn't going to let Mark or anyone else hold me back anymore. It's strange how quickly everything can change. One moment, you're fighting for your life, your future, your peace of mind, and the next, you're standing in a place where it all feels settled, where the storm inside you finally quiets, and you can breathe again. It's been 6 months since the trial. 6 months since I walked out of that courthouse, a woman who had lost so much, but gained something far more valuable in return. I won't lie, there were days when I didn't know how I would make it through. The divorce was just the beginning, and there were times when I felt completely alone, unsure of what the future held. But I knew that I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my past. Mark's attempts to contact me didn't help. He tried calling, emailing, even sending letters, but each time, I ignored him. Each time, I remembered the man. I thought I knew the man who had lied to me, humiliated me, betrayed me. I knew that his remorse was empty, that his apologies were just another way to manipulate me back into his life. I wasn't going to fall for it again. I remember the first time I opened one of his letters, just a few weeks after the trial. He tried to make himself the victim, playing on the guilt I didn't feel. He apologized for everything, blamed his mother, said he had been under too much pressure, but there was no apology for the way he had treated me, for the years of deceit, for kicking my mother out of our home. I tossed the letter into the trash without a second thought. That was the final goodbye, not just to Mark, but to everything he had represented in my life. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his validation. I only needed myself. Since the trial, I've focused on rebuilding. It wasn't easy, but nothing worth having ever is. I've started volunteering at a local women's shelter, offering legal advice and emotional support to women going through situations like mine. It's been a healing experience, helping others find their strength, just as I did. I've met some incredible women who've reminded me that I am not alone. We are all survivors, in one way or another. And then there's Emily. My daughter has been my rock through all of this, even though I know it was hard for her, too. The last few months have brought us closer than ever. We talk about everything now, our hopes, our dreams, our fears. I'm no longer the woman who hides behind the walls of her marriage, pretending everything is fine. I'm the woman who faces the truth, no matter how hard it is. And Emily sees that. Mark tried to reach out again, about 2 months ago. He sent a text message, something simple, asking if I was doing okay. I didn't respond. I don't think I need to. He's still trying to claw his way back into my life, but the truth is, I've already moved on. I've built something better, something stronger, and I won't let him tear it down again. For the first time in years, I'm living on my own terms. I've found my voice again. I've found my independence, my strength. The truth, no matter how painful, has set me free, and I know that I'm better off without him. As I sit here in my new apartment, the sun shining through the window, I feel a sense of calm I haven't felt in years. The past is no longer a weight on my shoulders. It's a chapter in a book I've closed for good. The key to moving forward isn't forgiveness, not for me. It's acceptance. I've accepted that what happened was out of my control. I can't change Mark or the choices he made, but I can control how I respond. I can choose to let go, to free myself from the past, and to look forward to the future. I'm free now, and that's all that matters. Author's note. As I sit back and reflect on Grace's journey, I can't help but think about how much her story mirrors the quiet battles we all face, even when we don't see them. Grace's struggle wasn't just about the betrayal by Mark. Her husband. It was about the deep betrayal of self. She lost herself in the middle of trying to make everything work, trying to please others, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect woman. But the truth is, none of us are perfect. We're all just doing the best we can with the knowledge we have at the time. And sometimes, when we're in the midst of trying to protect others, we forget to protect ourselves. I wanted Grace's story to reflect a journey of reclamation. She went from being someone who felt trapped in her marriage and bound by Mark's manipulations to someone who took control of her own narrative, her own life. What I admire most about Grace is her determination. It wasn't an easy journey. There were moments when she was uncertain, when she questioned her own instincts, when she thought maybe she was wrong for feeling betrayed, wrong for wanting something more. But it's those moments of doubt that make her growth all the more powerful. It's easy to say you'll leave a toxic situation when everything is black and white, but the reality is so much messier. Grace didn't just leave her marriage. She had to leave behind the parts of herself that Mark had chipped away at over the years, the parts that told her she wasn't enough, that she needed to apologize for being herself. And I think that's something many of us can relate to. Whether it's a toxic relationship, a family dynamic that never quite feels right, or the pressure of living up to other people's expectations, we all face moments where we feel small. It takes a lot of courage to step away from that, to say, I deserve more than this, and then actually walk away from the comfort of the familiar. Grace had to face her worst fear, standing alone, without the person who was supposed to be her partner. But in the process, she discovered a part of herself that had been buried for far too long, her own strength, her own voice. Mark, in many ways, represents the most common type of manipulator, the one who plays on your empathy, who twists situations to make you question your own feelings, your own reality. It's called gaslighting, and it's insidious because it makes you doubt everything you know to be true. The hardest part of Grace's story, I think, was not just facing Mark's betrayal, but facing the fact that she had allowed herself to be manipulated for so long. But once she saw the truth, once the fog lifted, she was able to take control of her life in a way that was completely empowering. It's not that she won in the traditional sense, it's that she found herself again. And that's a victory that can't be taken away. It's easy to look at the external things, the money, the assets, the settlements, and think that those define the outcome of the story. But for Grace, the true victory was internal. She didn't need Mark's approval or forgiveness. She didn't need his validation to move forward. The real power came from her ability to reclaim her own identity, to step into her own life without being dragged down by someone else's expectations. The hardest part of Grace's journey was not leaving Mark. It was letting go of the emotional baggage that came with him, the years of self, the belief that her worth was tied to his approval, the sense that she had to prove herself to everyone around her. But once she let that go, once she realized that her worth wasn't tied to anyone but herself, she found peace. The weight of her past, of his lies and manipulation, no longer had a hold on her. She had to make the conscious choice to release it, and that's something we all have to do in our own way, at different times in our lives. What's so powerful about Grace's story is that it shows us that it's never too late to reclaim your life. It doesn't matter how many years you've spent in a toxic relationship, how many times you've let someone else dictate your worth. It's never too late to take back control. It takes time, it takes courage, and it takes a willingness to face the parts of ourselves we might not want to see. But when we do that, when we stand up for ourselves, we find a strength we didn't even know we had. Grace's victory isn't just about leaving Mark or winning the trial. It's about her ability to step into her own power and move forward in a way that is true to herself. She didn't let him or anyone else define her future. And that's the kind of empowerment that lasts. It's not just about the outcome, it's about the journey of rediscovering who you really are. Beneath all the layers of other people's expectations, beneath all the doubts and fears. And once you find that strength, once you remember who you really are, there's no going back. The truth is, we all deserve the chance to start over, to rebuild, to find peace. Grace's story is a reminder that no matter what we've been through, no matter how deep the betrayal or how painful the journey, we can find our way back to ourselves. It may not be easy, it may take time, but it's worth it. And in the end, that's the most important thing. The victory is not in what we have, but in who we become when we finally break free.